Blessed love and peace. Back at it. I'm joined to share at the moment, whilst it's on the mind, um, and whatever's. Uh, Only about 13 on the storage situation. We stabilized this table. Oh, D. Okay. Uh, didn't even look to see what we looking like. Didn't look to see what it looked like. Anyway, all right. Don't know how much we got available for Banta, so we just get this joint completed. So the main consideration. Let's see. We got basically the topic. The initial topic is activist totalitarianism. Then get into me, relationship, situationship, and then value. And some of that I shared before. So see what we have here. First joint, activist totalitarianism. So I talked about this a while ago, maybe a few months ago, probably a few months ago. And the basic consideration is how young people, particularly young people, because mostly elders don't get involved with this type of stuff, unless they're like old heads and deep in the game or whatever else, and like just recruiting young blood. But basically, young people particularly getting this very severe, what's it called? Sanctimonious, self-righteous indignance about a particular issue in life, and become just very totalitarian of looking at everybody in a very severe binary. Anybody who's on the wrong side, vilification. Beautiful. Thank you. Peace and blessings again. Activist totalitarianism, self-righteous, sanctimonious, severe binary. Us versus them. People who aren't doing it. Again, enemy, evil, condemnation. And the big thing is very little room for disagreement, very little room for discussion, vehemence. And it is an exaggerated vehemence, because there's at the same time, ironically and paradoxically, there is amongst particularly the young activists this sense of disenfranchisement. So in order for the voice to be heard, in order for the cause to be fulfilled or whatever, it requires a militance of exaggerated proportions and intensity in order to like even just make it public and wail against the machine. But people are actually wailing against ordinary people. And so it just becomes further static and dissonance without solution. So that's part of the challenge about activist totalitarianism. And so I think I can share the examples first, or I can share the types. What I mean by types. Examples, or like further, like methodologies, actually what I mean to say, rather than types. There's further details with this as well. So I'll wait to share the examples, and I'll get into a little bit of the abstract description of the characteristics. So what is observed, again, is young people from high school age to university, and maybe early 20s. That's about the range. And what is observed is that it's usually youth, young people, who feel some type of moderate disenfranchisement, meaning that it's kinfolk who have an education, generally speaking, middle class, and didn't get the scholarship that they thought they deserved, didn't get like the admissions that they thought they deserved. And that might sound very condescending, but that's very, very large what it is. Maybe it might have something to do with being like jilted in terms of a romantic relationship or whatever else, but just like feel less than, put upon, or whatever, not feeling like they're living their best life, quote unquote, that cliche bullshit phrase or whatever, but like not like their dream isn't being fulfilled, and feeling less than because the way that they value themselves, the way that kinfolk value themselves or kinfolk selves has been not confirmed, has been rejected, has been like diminished somewhat, and rather than like just like coming to terms with that, it's a matter of like overcompensating through another sense of superiority, and that's basically what it is. So the kinfolk find some issue that they can connect with, and then find some sense of value and even superiority, and in that superiority devalue everyone else across the board, but particularly those who are in the hierarchy, in order to feel some type of equitability. You can say equity or diversity or inclusion or whatever you like to, all that. So that's what is observed. So kinfolk care, to be honest, care less about the issue, to be honest, and increasingly care further about just being greater than others. And here's this proof of it, because we're living and we're on the right side of this particular thing, and everybody else is wrong and less than. And so even just shutting people up as a methodology, shutting people up by wearing paraphernalia or just shouting a phrase or whatever else as a way of just silencing others. And the actuality is that they're not silencing the decision makers or the power brokers or whatever else. They're silencing and putting upon ordinary kinfolk who are striving to put food on the table for their family. And additionally, they're the easy targets, and not the actual decision makers. So all the marching and the protests and everything, it's not doing it. It's actually just feeding into the atrocities. And that's the thing also, because the activist totalitarians don't actually separate from the imperialism, and aren't trying to separate from the imperialism. They're just trying to get a higher position within the imperialism, a bigger chunk, systemically and institutionally within the imperialism. But the true solution for any of the isms is to let go of citizenship, let go of ownership, let go of the constructs of imperialism. That's the true solution for those who are going to be so hardcore or whatever. And that's not lambasting anybody else. That's doing it oneself. And then working tediously in this life amidst the vulnerabilities of that decision and that commitment and that vow and that deed, that trod. That's what the truth is. So meanwhile, people that are just like clinging onto a cause, getting some sense of superiority, overcompensating for certain devaluations, and just vying for a greater position within the pirate ship, whether that's the U.S. or anywhere else around the world. And that's what's frustrating, because the youth, who know less, become very self-righteous, and particularly with that self-righteousness, have this like audacity and bullshit ignorance of thinking they can talk to anybody the way they want to, and they can treat anybody because they're doing it for a righteous cause. Disrespect other people, disrespect elders, stop people from what they're doing, interrupt people with what they're doing, and additionally, because they're on the righteous cause. And it's like it completely abrogates the whole notion of empathy and respect and peace and love, which is basically what most of the causes are about, or at least feigned to be about. And so it's like, again, shut the fuck up. And then additionally, so that's much of like the characteristics and like the basics of activist totalitarianism. Youth also, it tends to be a part-time thing. It tends to be a vacation thing. It's like sporting the professional team that makes it into the finals. It becomes that type of like vacation, part-time, holiday type of experience, rather than an actual lifestyle a lack of discipline. So I'll give you some examples about this. Veganism is one example. I'm a vegan, and people can call me out. Oh, when's the last time I had cheese or milk or a dairy product? Maybe in recent days or weeks. And so vegans say, not vegan. That's that totalitarianism again. So that's an example. And vegans are one of the largest reasons why I wasn't a vegan for a long time. I was just a vegetarian because I saw just the militancy, the hard-heartedness amongst vegans, the judgmentalism, condemnation, and the utter bullshit when vegans go on the street and challenge people, particularly black folk. And this is not a racial thing, but this is just an example. When white upper-class vegans go to a black folk and say black folk should definitely be vegans because they should be able to identify with slavery and persecution. Meanwhile, white vegans are all types of atrocities and imperialism telling a black folk what they should do for virtue and for the sake of virtue. Utter lost of like just sensibilities and common sense. So just OC. We don't even worry about OCDC, just OC. Don't even, is that it? OC, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD? Okay, no, don't worry about that. Just your OC. Old school OC. So don't have no sense. And that's part of the challenge because that's this generation's, my generation's fault, and additionally, as I've described before, but that's part of the challenge. So veganism is one example of that. And what's another example of this? Environmentalism, total climate change, and additionally, kinfolk find this ability, or get some knowledge, get some information, and then flex that, and again silence people and get some sense of superiority, but are not making those changes within their own lives. Might get electric car, might get a Prius, might get a Tesla, and say, ooh, look how much I'm spending on my thing. Again, shut the fuck up. If you want to be truly environmentalist, live in a park. Go without electricity. Drink the water where you live at, or move to a place where you can drink the water where you live at. And just live life and share that and build. Feed yourself from environmentally harmonious, organic methodologies. And don't use money. So again, kinfolk ain't ready for that. Aren't about that life, but want to put that life on other people, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as the Gospels tell it. Like, what did I say? Like the false teachers of the Buddha's day, that go through all the extremities of asceticism and whatever else, and it don't mean shit. Even when you're wallowing in shit, it don't mean shit. Oh, look at this language. I'm so street. I'm not trying to blow up people's spots, but hey, we're in a different spot today. This ain't the hood per se. It's a hood. It is lightweight street though. It's daylight. Heavily trafficked too. Anyways, continuing on. So where I said veganism, environmentalism. People don't even talk about LGBTQ. I'm not talking about LGBTQ. That's another one, binary. And particularly, like again, the conversation I had with kinfolk just in recent months, very congenial. We just talked about spirituality and additionally, and so with that vibration of positivity and the heavens, then I say, okay, let's broach this subject and see if we can like talk about this rationally. And that's part of the thing. Not even losing the ability of talking rationally and even speaking calmly or respectfully. It just becomes an upfront, like a smack in the face from the beginning. And then if people respond to it, But conversation with the LGBTQ brethren a few months ago, just asking very sensitive, very calmly, non-accusationally, non-condemningly, or whatever. Just where do you recommend people, parents, husbands and wives, families who aren't LGBTQ and aren't trying to be in like the LGBTQ umbrella, Ella, where do you suggest such kinfolk live? because where we stay, we're living in a place where the flags are flown over City Hall, and additionally, and it's imposed in parks and schools, and additionally, where can we live away from this? Because we're not hate, but we're just not trying to see all this. We're not trying to be about that. We're trying to have to explain it to the children. We got other priorities in our lives. So where do you suggest we go? Where do you suggest we live away from this? And the response is, why do you have to live away from it? You should know you don't have to away from it. That's the answer. You don't have to live away from it. Deal with it. Wow, like that? That wasn't what the rhetoric was 20 years ago. That wasn't the rhetoric 30 years ago. Deal with it. We're here. Whatever. So that's that totalitarianism we're talking about, where there's little room for rationalization, there's little room for reasoning, there's little room for logic. It's a binary, us versus them, and bow down situation. So those are some of the examples of that. Activist totalitarianism, and particularly youth getting a little bit big for their britches, and particularly just being disrespectful to all different types of kinfolk, from giddy up, challenging, and there's further to this, but there's another example, and particularly what sparked this particular joint, and that particular issue is the whole Israel-Palestine situation, and so people can make presumptions of what they perceive our side to be on or whatever. We've already explained it explicitly, but people looking at me, particularly from offhand, without even saying anything, people who have some knowledge, some type of literacy, may immediately jump to conclusions, may jump to condemnations, and whatever else, without even saying anything, without even asking, or whatever else. So it is what it is, and it's on people accordingly. When people become belligerent and aggressive and hostile, as it already is the case, without even starting without even from jump, that elicits something within us to respond to that accordingly. Because we're getting if you watch the joints, you already see what we're dealing with at any given moment. So when kinfolk are coming up with their self-righteousness and their flag waving or whatever, and then presume somebody else to be on the other side, and then just addedness, is challenging. So that being said, one thing about the whole Palestinian thing, this is the crux of what we're sharing here now. One thing about the Palestinian thing is this. First of all land belongs to God. All land belongs to the Most High Elohim. All land belongs to the Most High Allah. Whatever name you refer to God, Tao, Brahman, Deus, whatever. Everything in this world, in this life, belongs to God. All believing, practicing Muslims believe that. All believing, practicing Jews believe that. So the land don't belong to nobody. Nobody has a claim on it. And the only way, according to Islam, the only way according to Torah, of having some type of credible stewardship of the land is through righteousness. It's not through violence. It's not through biggest weapons or whatever else. It's not through terrorism. It's not through bombs on children and women on either side. So everybody's enveloped in bullshit. Every motherfucking body in that war and on each side is enveloped in bullshit. And people jumping on the bandwagons who aren't even in it and trying to claim a side and then judge other people are on bullshit too. Plain facts. It's supposed to be about love. But that's the indignation, because people are using the suffering of others for their own purposes. And that's bullshit. So that's the bandwagoners. That's the bandwagoners who are jumping on, who are not even Muslim, who are not even Jewish or whatever else, and are just bandwagoners. Just like I said, like following the professional sports team as on a part-time basis. Don't go to Juma, don't go to shul or whatever else, but are latching their wagons onto what they perceive as front runners or whatever else, as their opportunism. And even just for the sake of feeling superior than somebody else or silencing somebody else. Alright, that's not the point here though. The point is twofold, two joints. One is how this issue is being utilized to assert genocide here on this continent, in the Western Hemisphere, particularly within the United States. What I'll try to like just describe this very briefly and concisely, without worrying too much about sequence or whatever. But basically, it's this: it's a smokescreen that's covering up the issue, and covering up like what the underpinnings and further. Exactly at this moment on this continent, the indigenous people signify approximately 1% of the total population of this land. As I've said multiple times, that is textbook genocide, and it's still going on. It's still happening. It's not past tense. It's not history. It's being done right now, at this moment. We're doing it right now, at this moment. Very few want to actually acknowledge that or do something about it. So people just ignore it, pretend such a sad history or whatever else, if people say anything at all. But it's going on right now. And when kinfolk talk about Palestine, and additionally, regardless of what side or whatever, but that feigned advocacy for indigenous, those who were here first, and additionally, is so bullshit when people are committing genocide themselves at this very moment. Americans. And it's a smokescreen. It's not just a smokescreen of that. It's even further, because how many people actually care about indigenous people? To be honest, it's nasty. People are going to care at one point. People are going to care. Before returning to Creator, people will care very strongly. People will care. That being said, there's another group, black folk. What we observe with the issue, particularly about Israel and Palestine, but it's also larger. There are additional elements here, and I'm trying to think of which one to share first to make it sense. But like I said, don't worry about the sequence so much as just the information, the insight. So, black folk are steadily being exterminated from this land. The unfortunate history of the Middle Passage and slavery is similar to the indigenous kinfolk, and there might be a larger percentage of black folk, but it's been in motion since World War II, and it's picking up speed, and it's being manifested in a number of different ways, and those that have some type of there are a number of avenues of escaping the just outright genocide. One is through identifying with LGBTQ and attaching to that bandwagon and getting the perks of admissions to universities and scholarships and residential arrangements. And additionally, one is through religiosity and attaching with a religious, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism, or one of the Eastern religions, or if it's repatriating and going back to Africa. Those are some of the few options that kinfolk have. Now, a lot of kinfolk are still going through that assimilationist one, of just trying to like be American and whatever else, and that's a very dubious endeavor. That's the main target. It's the hood, but the hood has a further resilience. It's assimilation, and in assimilation, isolation, separation, and in that separation, just further and further distancing from everything familiar until just being completely leveraged and then abandoned. Like millions of people going through that process at this moment, some fast and some slow. So what we are observing is how, particularly through the recent iteration, because Israel-Palestine is nothing new. It's been around since the World War II at least. So in this particular iteration, what becomes increasingly obvious is the endeavor of establishing Muslims as the official underclass of the United States, and supplanting blacks and indigenous kinfolk from that official underclass position within American society. So in addition to Muslims being the official underclass, and this is actually particularly being facilitated by Muslims. It's a larger, and this is I won't say conjecture, it's an observation. So we have to be mindful of like making explicit accusations, but we're sharing this insight for consideration, and we can reason about it. But this is what we are observing. We're observing the components of this. So the establishment of Islam, or not Islam, of Muslims, as an official underclass of American society, and replacing blacks and indigenous, so that people just look, perceive, and conceptualize the underclass as Muslim, as immigrant, particularly Desi, dark skin, Desi, Latino, Arab, and thereabouts. And then as like the middle class, this is what we're observing as an endeavor. We don't see it happening, but we see it being attempted. As a middle class, it's the favored minorities, which is Asian, East Asian particularly, and LGBTQ, being kind of like the gatekeepers between that and the overclass. And then the overclass continuing for the intent is people of European ancestry, and then select people from the other demographics of the underclass. And so that's what we observe. And there's collusion. There's exact collusion between Islam and Christianity and Judaism in this process. Because black folk are perceived as just a very heavy weight of guilt conscious and stagnancy within the psyche of the American society, because there's no justice, there's no remedying, there's no freeing black people, there's no allowing black people to have their own sovereignty according to the American mindset. It's just a matter of dealing with black people as much as possible, welfare, affirmative action, DEI, whatever it's called these days. But just like America's become so rich it can afford to do this, but it's still being a weight because the rest of the world is being able to compete with the U.S. further. So now that weight is being perceived increasingly as a drag. And so now it's a matter of like, we gotta upgrade. And so that upgrade is a Muslim underclass, again, a Muslim and immigrant, a Latino, Desi, dark skin, who are increasingly buy into the whole Americanism, don't have the whole angst and hostilities or whatever, are further willing to play the game and tote the line and do the dream thing of like one day going through the ranks and working hard and everything else like that, and that being perceived as like the functioning mechanics and machinery of America 5.0 or whatever people want to refer to it as. Don't even know what 5.0, 2.0, 3.0, whatever. That's what we observe as being attempted. We don't see it happening. We see it not happening. But that's what we observe attempting. Now, the further geopolitics of this is that this is particularly as a preface or a platform or premise for competing in maintaining certain leverage and competitive advantage, militaristic advantage, economic advantage with East Asia, China, and additionally. So it's all right. And a lot of this sounds contradictory and it sounds like illogical, and that doesn't make sense. It seems like counterintuitive. So I'm going to try to just articulate the basics of it and then explain as much as possible about it, and then go on to the next thing, because again, this is only for so long. But again, it's the situation, the inner workings, the hostilities, as well as the collusion between the Western traditions, particularly Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all of it. Being a staging theater for the further competition between East and West. And in that theater, Islam is willing to like collude, and I say Islam, it's not Islam, it's Muslims. It's Muslims are willing to collude, many, not all, many Muslims are willing to collude with Western society, Jewish, Christian, Greco-Roman, and additionally, particularly as a way of asserting the modernization of Islam, or the modernization of the Ummah, and also in strengthening the Ummah's position within the Eastern Hemisphere, particularly in Asia, East Asia particularly, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and additionally, and perceiving China as a competitive force against Islam. So partnering with the West in a very convoluted way as a way of strengthening the whole Western front against the Eastern front. And Russia is kind of like what they call a red herring. Is that what it is? It's kind of like it's a decoy. So part of the logic, part of the strategy, and don't sleep. A lot of Westerners have this presumption or this perception of the Middle East, and particularly Muslims and Arabs, as just being like simplistic and just like primitive or whatever else. I look at the technology; it's so primitive, and just sleep so much on the genius, the savvy, political savvy, diplomacy, and further within Mediterranean, within Islam, within the Muslims, within the Ummah. And this is love and peace to everybody. No disrespect to anybody, but we're just articulating components of the game. So what is observed in the strategy on the part of the of Muslims in this respect is, again, colluding with the West. Not all Muslims, but within the Ummah, colluding with the West, getting a stronger position within Western civilization, technology, and additionally, that further substantiates and solidifies positions in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, as well as within East Asia, for long-term developments and long-term strategy. And so there is a willingness of like many Muslims, assuming the underclass position, particularly new recent reverts, converts. The whole notion of a revert, the term is so, it's so like obviously pejorative. So, but willing to take that official position in the long term, with the recognition of, or with the presumption of that positioning the Ummah in a way that many can be in the middle class and upper class very quickly, and particularly through generations. That's one of those. It's also one of those situations of like, well, let's agree. Like if two enemies are fighting against each other and there's another enemy, the two enemies say, okay, well, let's have a truce right now. Let's both work together against that bigger enemy, and then we'll figure things out, or we'll go back to our antagonism later after we finish with the greater threat to both of us at the moment. So it's a little bit along those lines, and just kind of jockeying for long-term, future generational positioning within global civilization. So that's somewhat of what we observe in these conditions at the moment. One thought that occurs is, where do mixed people fit into all of this? All over the place. One reason why we don't see it happening, because part of what this methodology relies upon are those binaries that clearly define us versus them type of thing, and that's becoming further and further tenuous. It actually kind of segues into the second part concerning the Palestinian-Israeli situation. And that goes to behavior, that goes to discipline. And that is what we observe as the increasingly prominent methodology of differentiation between collectives within global civilization. It becomes less of the aesthetic, whether that aesthetic is the phenotype, physiology, skin complexion, hair, or eye color, whatever else, or whether that aesthetic is a religious affiliation, without actually believing, doing the practice of whatever, just signing up and having credentials. That aesthetic, that is less and less the significant distinguishing factor amongst peoples. What we observe is that increasingly the distinguishing factors between peoples is behavior, and civilization, nations, political constructs, and additionally evolving and sorting themselves out according to behavior, whereby those entities that are increasingly violent, that are increasingly whatever, get secluded and confined into certain conditions and environments and regions. Those that are increasingly peaceful, those increasingly harmonious, similarly. And the nature of that is not one conquering other, because the violent ones, The point here is not to get into the details of that, but that's what we observe happening in the near generations by the grace of the Most High. Is division based upon behavior, and there being certain agreements and treaties and otherwise, and the League of Nations, the United Nations are very initial, very primary, or early iterations and stages of that evolution. So it gets further advanced, it gets further evolved, it gets further, we could say, genuine, balanced, organic, but along those lines. So it's not just like sign up. And going back to the Palestinian-Israel thing, that's the other problem, is that, again, like we said, a lot of the people who are picking up those banners additionally are not even Muslims, are not practicing Islam, don't offer salat, don't go to Jummah, don't offer zakat, but are still waving the flags and representing Islam, initiating confrontations with people, and misrepresenting and putting a bad name on the Ummah and Islam. And that's bad, that's problematic for Islam and for Muslims. So that when people who are ordinary kinfolk don't feel one way or the other, start getting accosted by non-Muslims in the name of Islam, then people start having a very legitimate bad sentiment towards Islam and towards Muslims. And this is from first-hand experience on both sides. Recent first-hand experience. And that's the challenge that Muslims should consider significantly. And that we're less privy about what the mechanics are, who is sanctioning the kinfolk to support the Kufiye and represent Palestinians and represent essentially Islam as well. Like, where people are feeling this sense of ownership to be able to do that. It has to come from some Muslim someplace, so that they say, well, so-and-so said. But even then, it's not a good look, and it's causing static and dissonance, and it bodes badly. And the strategy itself of the establishment of an underclass, any semblance of truth to that, in that scenario actually being factual and genuine and predominant, that is an evil, because that is colluding with a genocide of a people, the indigenous people of this land and the Africans of this land, for temporal gain. And not just genocide at all is evil, but for it to be intentionally orchestrated by people who profess to believe in Allah, and practice righteousness and be on the deen, that bodes bad. So we can say that about Judaism, we can say that about that's Christianity, but it's already understood and recognized for Christianity and Judaism for hundreds of years at this point, particularly. So, but we're just addressing it in the contemporary context at the moment. So that's some of what we share. The vibe right now is very different. The energy is very different. So not as lighthearted at the moment, as well it should not be. So I'm trying to discern the thing I was talking about in terms of the other topics. There's other elements of it. There's other things I was thinking about, but at the moment, rather than struggle to think about that, I'm just gonna continue on. If something else occurs, might go back to it. But for the moment, just going on to the second topic. That second topic being, what was I talking about? Relationship. Did I say that was with? Ba. Okay. Okay. This is somewhat relevant. What I observe, and this is some of the interesting, something that just like it's like a personal thing, but there are other people who experience this, particularly those that I talk about in terms of, well, I'm not going to phrase it like that. I'm not going to frame it like that, but it's applicable to people in different walks and experiences, but it is somewhat of a specific experience. In terms of like how women seem to perceive me in my life, particularly in the context of prospective marriage. it's interesting to observe the differentiation during the course of life. And some of it is very much attributable to just the stage of life, how old one gets, all these gray hairs and old foginess. Um, but at the same time, it's also like the vibe and the air. So there continues to be vibes, and additionally, but in addition, I'm doing further observation, um, and here's what I'm talking about. And I'm going to start like from my university days experience. I know what it's like for women to chase me. I'm not trying to. There's no like. I'm not trying to brag. Whatever. I just know what that's like. I know what it's like to be with women who are on the same team, who like identify as oneself. It's not like a stranger thing. It's not like a who is this. It's like, no, we're here. We're in it. Let's go. Let's be about this. So I know what that's like, and I know what it's like in that environment where women communicating interest are very, and again, it's also a matter of two predominant factors. One, youth. Women at a younger age tend to be further energetic, further vibrant. Obviously, there are a lot of different personality types, but in that youthful vibrancy, there's often increasingly, further frequently, that tendency among certain women of being, or certain young women, of being just expressing the affection proactively. In a lot of different ways, but just letting it be known in no unmistaken terms her interest in her brethren, and I've had that for myself. Again, but it's two things. It's youth, but it's also being in a protected environment, or comparatively protected environment, whether it's a school, private school, a university, or whatever, where there's a sense of security. There's a sense of like we know who the people are. There's background checks and everything else. There's the experience of seeing each other on a regular basis to have some kind of regularity and trust within that, so a woman has a further comfort in expressing herself, and her guard is lowered, perhaps, so to speak, and so she feels further comfortable and secure in communicating or expressing her affections. So that's one thing that I experienced in my youthful days, or youthfuler days. Now, and particularly within a black environment, where people identify as being of African ancestry, and again, that's part of like just the very, very rote, very immediate sense of being part of the same experience, same team, and additionally, and there's less of that kind of like speak the same language and have the same frames of reference, know the same inside jokes, and everything. There's that familiarity. So it's very understandable that the vibe is easier to witness and feel and express and respond to and build in that kind of environment. Now, that being said, I've been in situations, even at that stage of life, right after undergrad, living overseas in England, living overseas in South Africa, living in different cultural environments, going to a PWI here at the university here, going to another university for law school where it's a PWI. And so being in that environment where it's not all black, and there is that standoffishness that I experienced in earlier days in high school or otherwise, or in middle school would be a little bit young, and even in middle school wasn't that, because I was like OG in middle school, so it didn't have that too tough, and it's a different situation. That's another topic right there. But there is a standoffishness in my experience at law school. However, at the same time, there's the sense of belonging. There's that sense of shared elitism and being in the fold. As long as one is affiliated, enrolled in the school and affiliated with the school, then they have that ticket and are part of the club. And so even with that standoffishness, there's still a very large people, at least in my experience, large number of women who are receptive, who communicate that affection. Not the same way that young women do, but very responsive to invitations for dates, relationship, and otherwise. Not necessarily the most honorable of what, just speaking from experience, but it's because particularly of this experience of being in an elite environment, the elite private club, and as long as the person is a member, there it is. What I also remember is that in that experience, when I was outside of that framework, if people didn't see me or recognize me as particularly being a part of that private club, if we're at like a city nightclub where it's a general population, and people don't know the credentials and whatever. We might have that swagger, and people and women might respond to that, maybe kind of sort of. We might have some clothes, and that can like be distinctive, but that's not necessarily like a definitive thing. Kinfolk can be gangster or whatever else. But what I recognize is that it was a different vibe. It wasn't like that exclusive, we're all part of the same club, all you have to do is say the word and we're out kind of thing. By that I'm talking about being at a house party or whatever, and it's just that sounds like extremely, perhaps actually extremely condescending, extremely presumptuous, extremely derogatory. That's facts. That's very much facts. It becomes to that point, say the word, and the woman is with that brethren for the evening, for the week, or whatever, and that sounds nasty. Ask somebody. If you don't already know, ask somebody. That's what it is. Say the word, and that's it. It takes something to get into the room, but once kinfolk are in the room, like kinfolk are going for theirs. And anyways, that's my point. Like it does, as long as one is in the club, there it is. And if somebody's outside the club and interacting with people who don't know or aren't part of that club or whatever, or don't have that same value, it can be a crapshoot. And my experience is that my personal experience is I wasn't chasing women like that too tough, anyways. When I did, like, I would go to the coffee house, and I would chop it up with the baristas, the servers, the sister who worked there, and build cordial relations, interaction, and rapport. To that, after a while, there was receptivity, and there is that type of initiation of relationships, and additionally, and so that was somewhat of an affirmation about being able to be. Being able to be in a relationship with a woman outside of just the elite private club or whatever, and with women who don't actually value that or ain't about that type of lifestyle, or per se. Now, and I say all that because I'm speaking to how a person such as myself, a man such as myself, is valued and perceived within society, particularly by women, and particularly as a marriage candidate or marriage prospect. So what I observe after graduating from law school, when I catch hell, when things go well and I begin my spiritual path, what I observe increasingly is, without that club membership, and being outside of the fold, particularly of black folk, people of African ancestry, what I observe is kind of like the harshness of society, like the harsh actualities of just being devalued, optimally, utterly devalued. To the point of just being either looked at as an enemy, as a slave, or as an animal. One of those, even by the women, and even when it's affection, even when it's congenial, even when it's I won't say positive, but even when it's a congenial approach, or a congenial demeanor particularly from a woman, that she's showing interest or whatever else, it's still in that context of being a slave or an animal or a lightweight and enemy, but particularly either a slave or an animal. And then by that I'm talking about when a woman shows affection, it's like it's like the affection that one shows towards the beloved dog of the family, or to like the beloved slave, the house slave, that's just so faithful, in addition, that's friendly and kind and such a good person. It's that kind of derogatory, because there's a sense of superiority that we observe amongst many different types of women, all different types of ethnicities and religiosities. There's this sense of superiority when looking at a woman as an outsider. Very often, I can't say across the board, but there's an air, a general air that needs to be like diffused to be able to see kinfolk mutually, appropriately, and part of the initial stages of diffusing that barrier or whatever is all the stereotypes, all the shibboleth, all the conditioning, all the misinformation, all the ignorance that people are taught, and that feed people's perceptions of the other, and guide people in how they approach somebody from the other experience. So some people are further attuned to multiculturalism, seen or whether, and other people are less so. And even those who are attuned to multiculturalism, it can be also very superficial multiculturalism, rather than like a deeply devoted, intuitive, kind of universal light kind of experience and consciousness. So anyways, in the meanwhile, what is observed is in the difference and the distance between people, and particularly in that prospect of relationship, marriage between a man and a woman, coming from different perspectives or experiences, communities, there being that necessity of diffusing the pretenses of differentiation as well as devaluation, either as an enemy, as a slave, or as an animal. Those are pretty much the ones I think about in terms of like how it's perceived. Because obviously the enemy one is just like they're dangerous. Be careful. They're physically harmful. They're mentally harmful, manipulative, and the nice ones are the ones you have to look out for the most. So that's part of the challenge. And with any relationship, it's cultivated through communication. It's cultivated through regularity, gradual steps of trust. And that's done further easily when kinfolk are in school together or work, kind of, sort of. By the point people reach certain ages in life, people get further hardened in their conditioning. So by the time people get into like the work mode, it's not too late, but it's a little late. Let me tell it. I'm deep in the diversity game, though, so to speak. Not diversity, though. Try to think of something else. Starts with a D. Deep in the devoted game. So, anyways, that's one joint I'm observing at the moment as I continue to work and reconcile my. I'd like to sing on key. All right. Big up Johnny Gill. All right. What else we got? I said there was one other thing. Value. How about that? We go to value. I've said this one before. How we value ourselves. Just reckon, like, first, there's a purpose in life. The nature of life is suffering, but there's a purpose. Purpose is healing. We all have a talent. We all have a skill. We all have a path to cultivate our skills around our talent, to heal others, to be compensated, to establish a vocation, a craft, a trade, and to be compensated, to be supported, to have a livelihood, and to build family, to sustain ourselves, build family, and live this life. So we all have that purpose, one way or the other. And it's for us to identify what our talent is and what the skills are to be cultivated around that talent, and the craft, the vocation we practice, the occupation we practice, based upon our talent and our purpose. That's for us to decide respectively, for each of us to decide that for ourselves. We are guided, and that's appropriate by parents and teachers, and additionally, and that's very appropriate. Ultimately, at some point, we have to decide for ourselves. And in that decision, it's a matter of identifying what we value about ourselves. What we value about ourselves. Whether we value our honesty, whether we value our charisma, our sense of humor, whether we value our physical fitness, whether we value our nutrition and eating healthy, whether we value our ability to sing and tell stories, whether we value our loyalty in relationship with friends and family, whatever it is that we value about ourselves, um, and value about ourselves, particularly as part of our purpose in this life, not just because we can do something nice, but because it's part of what we acknowledge as our purpose in this life. When we find what we value about ourselves, then it's a matter for us to like protect that, to optimize that, to nurture that, so that when it comes time to like deciding, okay, so what's this craft, what's this vocation that we're going to do, what's this occupation, that occupation can make lots of money, that occupation can get lots of celebrity or whatever else, all these different trappings, can get lots of credentials, you can fly through the ranks of society, but is that what you value about yourself? And or how does that affect the things that you do value about yourself? If you do get that job, you do make that money, is it taking you away from taking you away from your family and friends and your loyalty of like attending to the little things? Loyalty is not just a matter of like saying never betraying somebody. Loyalty is like coming through on birthdays and special occasions and kinfolk need it, and just on a regular basis. That's what loyalty is. So getting a job is, and how does that affect your relationship? If that's what you value about yourself, does it affect your honesty? Do you have to be secret? Can you not share what you do on your job with others? Is it highly classified and confidential? Are you doing dirt? Does it require, I don't like it, but it is what it is. Somebody's got to do it. I'll try to do it in the most responsible way or whatever. How does that affect how you value yourself? Maybe it's not. Honesty isn't something that one values oneself significantly about. But it's for each of us to be knowledgeable accordingly, so that years down the road, there's not that self-loathing and frustration and existential malaise or whatever else, because we've thoroughly, chronically devalued ourselves but in our daily activity. So particularly for young kinfolk, that's something for consideration. And then when we find what we value about ourselves, at this very moment, just what we know about ourselves in life, what we value about ourselves, then to discern, to recognize who else values us for this reason, to do this. Who else values us for doing this? For me, perhaps it's like doing interfaith work, studying different religions. Who truly values me for doing that? Who amongst my family, who amongst my friends is like, you should do that? Who is investing in me doing this, and otherwise? And in discerning that, who's doing that, who values us for the way that we value ourselves. Honor that, respect that, cherish that, be grateful, and be likewise similarly supportive of the kinfolk in such a way. And also be able to distinguish who doesn't value for how you value yourself, and recognize the difference, because there are many people who value us for things that are harmful for ourselves, and who can like reward us and are very supportive of us doing things that we don't value about ourselves, and intentionally so often, of dissuading us into some peace and blessings to you, Brian. Dissuading us into different paths. I mean, that we can talk about drugs, alcohol. It's not even that severe. Can dissuade us into a job that we don't want, or other ways, activist totalitarianism, or whatever else. Valuing us for those things, valuing us because we have money, and are very, very friendly with us whilst we're generous with the money. And then when we don't have money, I got to do something, busy. But just recognize, another way, I guess, the way is using people, valuing somebody for something. Money is a very easy way of showing that example, but using people, if somebody's popular, using that person just to have access and be in that realm, in that realm of charisma. So just to recognize that when people are valuing us for things that we don't value about ourselves as much as our priority things, to be mindful of that, and mindful of how much we avail ourselves to that valuation and to that influence, to that reward, and to that kind of like how much we invest ourselves in such a relationship, because it intrinsically leads us away from where we not even want to be, but where we find peace and fulfillment within ourselves. So, anyways, and that particularly pertains to marriage. Um, uh, Being married and being committed and in bond with a spouse who values us respectively for how we value ourselves. Not because of credentials, not because of trappings or superficial things or whatever else, unless the superficial things is how someone values himself. I ain't gonna knock that per se either. I don't want to be too devaluated about that. But anyways, obviously that's like the most. It's like the most significant relationship, the most significant influence in life. Um, so it's beneficial to invest in that relationship, commit to that relationship when the other person values us for what we are, or not what we are, but how we value ourselves. So, anyways, that's some of the consideration for the moment. A little bit all over the place, lightweight, but that's the basic gist of it. This is the scene. It is still green. You know what I mean. Blah, blah, blah. Anything else before we continue on? Patience. All thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace and Rastafari.